Hello and welcome to World Talks. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Between 1943 and 1944, Ukrainian nationalists carried out, as the Polish parliament has described it, a genocide campaign in the Volhynia region, brutally murdering an estimated 100,000 Poles. Now, the victims, buried in mass graves in what is now modern-day Ukraine, never received proper burial. And on July 11, Poland honors the victims of the Volhynia massacre. As the issue continues to divide Poland and Ukraine, on this episode of World Talks, we take a look at how historical reconciliation has become a pivotal element of modern-day relations between the two countries. And joining me now in studio to discuss this is Paweł Markiewicz, analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Paweł, so glad to have you here with us on World Talks this evening. Paweł, it's quite an important day and a heavy day in Poland here, July 11th. Let me ask you first and foremost, but where do we stand with this entire situation? I want to know, how widely known is the Volhynia massacre in Ukraine, and particularly among the younger generation, and also with the ongoing war?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, and it's a great question to start from. Recent research done by the Mieroszewski Center here in Poland showed that about 23% of Ukrainians have a good knowledge of what the Volhynia massacre was and the events that kind of transpired around it. So it's not a lot. But then kind of looking at the other statistical figures, about 50 to 60% of Ukrainians have some kind of understanding of what this was. So we can say that there is a general knowledge about what Volhynia was and the massacre and the events around it. However, I think that a lot of Ukraine is still coming to terms with how to interpret and how to come about when it comes to commemorating this and speaking to their Polish counterparts about it. So there is more knowledge, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done, in my opinion. I
just want to ask you to go into a little bit more detail, because, I mean, I've watched a couple of Ukrainian narratives, also in Ukrainian, some in Russian. Can you walk us through what the Ukrainian narrative is? I mean, you say they have their own, of ways of what they think about it, but what are some of their points and what they say about the Volhynia massacre?
So I think it's very important to look at kind of the organization of Ukrainian nationalists and the Ukrainian insurgent army. So these were the two kind of key players when it came to committing the atrocities on the Poles in Volhynia. So for a lot of Ukrainians, they look at these two organizations through a very anti-Russian lens, which fits kind of where Ukraine is now, right? Fighting the Russian occupiers and pushing back Putin and Russian imperialism. But they tend to overlook oftentimes the very brutal aspect, which was the atrocities committed against Poles, which was rooted in the ideology that fueled the organization of Ukrainian nationalists and these insurgents when it came to what they did in Volhynia. So there's kind of almost a fork, a dichotomy when it comes to looking at these two organizations, right? They kind of try to pick and choose what they want to interpret from them, rather than kind of packaging it together and looking at it as one whole.
To my understanding, Ukraine rejects the term genocide in this context. What's your take on that?
Right. I mean, there's clearly a different interpretation when it comes to some of the work that Ukrainian historians have done on the topic of the Volhynian massacres. It's usually placed in the context of a common, almost civil war within the Second World War between Poland and Ukraine. This has been something that Polish historians have done a very good job, in my opinion, kind of debunking. Showing that the apex of what happened, which was what happened in Volhynia on July 11th, 1944, was rooted in the ideology that fueled the organization of Ukrainian nationalists and the Ukrainian partisan army, which was that they wanted to see an ethnic Ukrainian state emerge after the Second World War, and they were willing to do anything to make sure that anybody that was non-Ukrainian was removed from that territory, what they saw as Ukrainian ethnographic territory, whether it was forcing them out or whether it was, in this case, against the Poles, brutally massacring them.
Where do we stand today, Paweł? How is the work on the exhumation process of the victims in Volhynia progressing? Where do Poland and Ukraine stand with this today?
Yeah, at least in my opinion, it seems like they're making small steps, almost baby steps once again. This is something that was begun several years back, then it was pushed off and stopped, and now it's back again. So it's going back and forth, this process, and again, they're making baby steps. I think that at least at this time, the Ukrainian side understands at the political level that for Poland this is a very important topic, and it's something that will have to be reconciled at the very highest levels, which will then also force society to kind of come to terms with this as well. So what's going on, the exhumations, it seems that it's going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that the Polish side would certainly want to see more, because it's certainly not just one or two small little areas where Polish villages once stood, but it's spread out through a vast stretch of what is today Volhynia. So there's still a lot that needs to be done, but certainly there are steps in the right direction. Well, I think that certainly it needs to be expanded, right? It certainly does need to be expanded. Perhaps even the Ukrainian authorities placing some kind of a monument where these Polish villages once stood, because of course, where these villages once stood, they're open fields now. There's no sign of these villages anymore, right? So those Poles don't have somewhere where they can commemorate where this happened, this tragedy happened, right? So I think steps like this would certainly help kind of heal the process. And it would be very important as well to prevent Russian disinformation from using the topic as something to pull. Do
you believe that Russia, that was actually my next question to you, is do you believe that Russia is already using it as an excuse, right, to weaken Polish-Ukrainian relations? Right.
Well, I think this is low-hanging fruit when it comes to that for Russia. Certainly when it comes to any type of historical question, right? We can recall that Russia, over the past several years, has made claims that, well, Poland wants to take back its former territories, which are part of Western Ukraine today, right? So Lviv and those areas, which is completely untrue. And certainly when it comes to this historical debate as well, right? Russia likes to play these games, likes to play these groups apart, because the topic is so sensitive and tense. And it certainly is easy for them to kind of light a match and let it go.
Paweł, I want to ask you, there's I'm hearing different narratives, and also for those, possibly for the viewers who don't know, tell us please what role Stepan Bandetta played in Ukraine's national identity, and specifically why is it so controversial here in Poland?
Well, Bandetta is certainly the figurehead when it comes to the organization of Ukrainian nationalists, at least a faction of that group, right? Because there were two factions, which maybe for the sake of time we won't get into all the historical debate on that, but he was certainly head of a more radical faction of younger Ukrainian nationalists that were willing to do anything to see a Ukrainian state emerge, right? This was kind of the built-up frustration that Ukrainians had after the end of the First World War, when they didn't get a Ukrainian state, while Poles got an independent state. And it boiled over, right, into the Second World War. So Bandetta is certainly that figurehead, someone that inspired other Ukrainian radical nationalists to pursue this ideology of a Ukrainian state for Ukrainians, which meant, right, removing by any means necessary any non-Ukrainians. So in this case, especially the Poles.
What would meaningful reconciliation actually look like in the near future?
I mean, that's a very good question. Certainly, something along the Franco-German lines would certainly be very, very interesting to see, where Poles and Ukrainians can talk very tough topics, but not let those tough topics go into political or defensive strategic collaboration in the region. I think that the key that Poles and Ukrainians understand is that they need to work together to prevent Russia from being more aggressive. And they can't look past that, right? So these historical debates and discussions and arguments at some points can't overshadow the broader picture, right? But certainly you need to understand and reconcile those in order to make sure that everything balances itself out.
And just very briefly, as a final question to you, do you believe that Ukraine took possibly too long to allow these exhumations to begin?
Well, I mean, I think that has a lot to do with the understanding of Volhynia and the massacre and how that was taught among Ukrainians for generations, right? During the Soviet period, in Soviet Ukraine, it was certainly not taught. Even among some of those Ukrainian nationalists that emigrated after the war to the West, it wasn't mentioned because it's a very uncomfortable topic. So there's still a lot to do to kind of get back to that position of understanding what it was. And I think even I heard something today of Polish President Duda saying that President Zelensky had no idea of Volhynia until he spoke with me, what that was and what it meant. So certainly that's not an understatement. I think that certainly does exist still. And that needs to be worked on as well.
Thank you so much, Paweł Markiewicz, for all your input with us here on World Talks this
Thanks so
evening.
much.
And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.